Okay. Have at it. Who would like to go first? Please.
So I am a colleague, and very honored to be a colleague of Dr. Koppelman in the Department of Political Science. And I guess I have a more personal, professional question. How did Professor Koppelman get to the Department of Political Science? And what have you been able to see in all of this fascinating work that you could bring to political scientists?
Shall I repeat for you? Did you hear it?
Generally.
So the question is, how did you come to be connected to the Department of Political Science? And what did you bring to and maybe get from your colleagues in political science?
Well, to begin with, in government we realized that Stony Brook University was in effect Suffolk County's university. Suffolk County was a medical wasteland. In part it was an educational wasteland, and we saw Stony Brook as the opportunity to help Suffolk County solve the many problems that were inherited over several hundred years without planning. And at the beginning, I had 3 invitations simultaneously. When the Marine Science Research Center was created, I was invited to give a course on coastal zone management. At the same time, the Harriman College wanted me to teach in public policy, and I got a 3rd invitation, which has lasted just about 51 years, so I'm the dinosaur in the political science department. But in any event, we had a brilliant young assistant professor, Ashley Schiff, and his doctorate was on an environmental subject, namely the question of fire and forests. And he was the first one that recognized that the federal program of Smokey the Bear was absolutely the wrong policy to advocate, because many forests, including our pine barrens, cannot survive without fire. And unfortunately, even though he invited me to join the poli-sci department, I didn't at the beginning, but he passed away. The doctor that he had made an improper evaluation and said, well, you don't really have a heart problem, maybe indigestion or whatever it is. And it turned out to be an inflammation of the heart, and the poor man passed away. Well, there was no one to pick up his class. So I was asked if I could fill in, which I was happy to do, because he's the one that introduced me to poli-sci. And it's been a happy affiliation ever since. I see some of my colleagues here. Gallagher is a very dear friend, and several others. Milt Lodge, one of the most brilliant political scientists, not just in this country, but internationally, and the former chairman of our department. And I don't speak this well about most chairmans, being just a faculty member, but Jeff Siegel, in my judgment, was the finest chair that the poli-sci department has had in half a century. And that's how I come to be tolerated in the poli-sci department. Long answer to a short question.
You know, I had an experience last year going to meet and visit Lee with Malcolm, and one of the things I learned about Lee is, oh my goodness, he has a fantastic memory for everything, including fine details. So thanks for sharing. And
by the way, my wife doesn't believe that statement.
I just won't go there. Next. Yes.
Hi, I had a question for Anna. Will it initially initially inspired you to make this stuff? And like about
Did everyone hear the question? What inspired them to take on this job? Adventure.
Is this on? Okay. When Dr. Taylor first came out to us, he originally emailed us winter break, a week before the semester started, to ask if Anna and I could embark on a journey of working on an independent project on Dr. Koppelman. And when we were first asked about it, we hadn't known how big of a journey this would be, much less we didn't know who Dr. Koppelman was at the time. Or each other. So, but I'm very grateful to have come to know you. But what inspired us on this journey, besides Dr. Taylor and Mark seeing something in us that I didn't see in myself, I'm not sure if I could speak for Anna on that, but I did not think that I would be able to do a documentary in the time period that we had, and I didn't think that I had the skill set in order to do it because I've never worked on media or film before. But it was mostly Dr. Taylor and Mark in finding something in us that he believed in us, so I believed in us.
I will say, yeah, so we weren't necessarily picking out the specific topic or what exactly we were doing with it per se, but so while that part wasn't our creative aspect or through our inspiration, we were definitely inspired to pick the smaller topics, especially going through the project. When you do research, I've noticed, and you can probably tell this too, and a lot of people probably understand this, you don't necessarily start with one small idea in mind. You go broad, and then you kind of find what you're interested in, what inspires you. And I can definitely say one of the parts was even just talking to Dr. Ryder when we were talking about what is the public, and the importance of being able to talk to the public and things like that. And so each moment along that journey was an inspiration of itself on what path exactly we were going to be taking with this film. So
credit where credit is due, though. Dr. Taylor and I handed them the task, and like, hey, take a look at Dr. Koppelman's body of work, and the amount of research involved in this project, and meeting all of the people that are here and outside of there, it was a huge endeavor to see it like happen on the
Can you guys tell me what kind of software you used, and is it easy to use? Could other people do it?
So that was quite an interesting feat that we took on. Anna uses iMovie, and I do not have a Mac, though I wish I had one during this project. I used DaVinci Resolve, which I was first introduced to in a mapping class, Sustainability 111, where we had to make a music video of ourselves. And so I used DaVinci Resolve from recommendations from both my professor, Donna Selch, and another student that had taken that class. But I wouldn't recommend using two different softwares because going back and forth, we created a YouTube channel to sort of be able to share the videos with each other without taking up space on our own drives or emails. So we had to keep downloading one person's edit to our edits and just keep going through that because a lot of the time we weren't together. When we edited, we sort of edited on the spot, then gave it to the other, let them see it, and then critique it, and then keep going back and forth.
So one of the reasons why I did use iMovie is because it is a decently easy program to use and things like that. But again, as Megan said, probably not two different programs at the same time, but that was another difficult aspect. Even over the summer, we were both I live in Maine, so we were completely separate, and we were trying to work over different sections, uploading to YouTube, and sometimes that would degrade the quality of the movie and things like that. But definitely both programs separately are very, very nice to use. There's a ton of videos and things like that out there if you don't understand a program or a certain aspect of it, or you need something done. And of course, there's a lot of people who probably have the same problems that you do if you are looking to make a video. So if you have I know when I had a question about iMovie, I could just even Google the question. Thank goodness for Google. Just Google the question, and I would be able to kind of see what other people were going through at the same time. And YouTube was great in that if you did create a channel, you could upload and you had infinite space basically to work with. And I believe you can actually directly edit on YouTube. However, because Megan and I were both not familiar with it, it was a little difficult to do. We were trying to work with programs that we both knew given the time we had.
Lee, what today would you identify as the major problems facing Nassau and Suffolk County? I mean, if you were back in office on top of the Dennison building, what would your priority list look like today?
Well, number one on priorities, of course, is the environmental health of Long Island. We have only one sole source aquifer, and if that water isn't protected, Nassau and Suffolk will be out of business. We don't have external sources of water. But aside from that, one of the biggest problems that has persisted is the lack of a balanced housing inventory. Planning should provide for the entire life cycle of the total population, and we have never done that. Now with planning, you just have to be patient, and fortunately I've lived long enough that some of my ideas have taken a half a century to get caught up. And I'm somewhat amused when people say, gee, why didn't I listen to you then? And my response is, well, where the hell have you been then? But the real problem that we face is that we've had success, particularly in the environmental field, partially in the transportation field. I lost all of those battles, whether it was maglev trains or mass transit down the central spine of the Long Island Expressway. Long Island would be far more enhanced today if we had a balanced transportation system. But the biggest enigma, even though Governor Rockefeller, who we worked closely with, Governor Como, who we worked closely with from the time he was Secretary of State at the governor's level, that was in the Carey administration, they all asked me, what is the most pressing problem? And that was easy, the lack of balanced housing. And they did try to respond to it. But I'd like to add a postscript to that, perhaps two postscripts. Number one, particularly with the current climate in Washington, which has been strongly anti-environment, the state of New York, despite the periodic corruption in the Assembly and the Senate, have been remarkable in the nation in that when it comes to the environment, regardless of party, they could be big C conservative, Republican, or Democrat, when it's come to the environment, they all joined forces. And so the Long Island delegation created the Joint Legislative Committee, Republicans and Democrats, Assemblyman Engelbright on one hand, certainly Senator Laval, one of the best legislative friends of this university, and they worked in harmony for the well-being of the environment of Long Island. And the last postscript I want to mention, even though the film in part sounds like a eulogy or an epitaph, I'm not sure which, and the comments made by some of my former students and dear friends on the faculty here, I'd have to admit I didn't recognize myself half the time. So you have to take a grain of salt. But the last comment I'd like to make is that in terms of the news media, I've been interviewed internationally in places like Australia and China, nationally, all over the country, certainly in the state of New York and Long Island. And I have never been interviewed by professional journalists that have anything superior to Megan Gallagher or Anna Smith when they wanted to interview me, my first reaction was no. But then they came in because I never ever would turn down a Stony Brook student. I have too much respect for them. They came in and they were the most organized journalists I had ever experienced. They didn't say, "Tell me everything you know about." They had incisive questions. They got right down to the issue, and I was very pleasantly surprised with the product. I'm not sure where they got some of the photographs from, but in terms of professionalism, SoMAS has to be proud of these two young scholars because they're not only brilliant, but they're certainly accomplished, and I thank them for that.
I'm from another discipline, but my environmental sciences major, wife, tries to fill me in. Last 2 times I went to West Meadow Beach, I was chased out, not allowed to swim. Some scientists are putting a time element, roughly 12 years, that we have to get our act together. Anyone, do you agree that we have X amount of time left?
There are probably a lot of people that could answer that better than I here, but certainly I think the time frame is short with regard to us responding to climate change and all the associated issues with it. And I think if I can just add a little bit to what Lee had to say about Anna and Megan, we are totally dependent upon them not only to take up the spear for doing the science for climate change, but one of the things that I think we as scientists have failed at miserably is being able to communicate with anybody. They have done a remarkable job in doing that, calling attention to what Lee has done and accomplished, but also spelling out what the problems are and for Long Island and elsewhere, and we need more like them. And if I might just add one other thing with regard to something that Lee said many years ago, I think somewhere he actually wrote this between 1963 and 1965. He said that Long Island was totally developable. He says we have no mountain ranges or river basins like the Mississippi to protect us from total development. And he advocated at that time that I think somewhere around 10%, 12% of our space on Long Island must be preserved for open space, or otherwise we will all go mad and leave Long Island. And I just want to emphasize that that is a problem that we continue to have today.
Can I make add a comment on the question about climate change? When will it, can it be too late? This is something I feel really strongly about, and we want to have some hopeful comments. It will never be too late, ever, to do good things. It will never be too late to protect the environment. It'll never be too late to do positive things with respect to the rate of climate change. There are things that we worry about tipping points and glacier melting and so on, but there will never be a time when we can no longer do things to protect the environment. There is just no question about that. So, evil. More questions? Yes.
This is for Megan and Anna. How did you decide what people to interview and to use in your movie?
Well, a few of our thoughts were, okay, so we've looked at all this research. Who are people that are connected to Koppelman through various means? So we have here, of course, Dr. Davies and Murdacco, and both of them were not only students of Dr. Koppelman, but they've also worked with him in the past. And so they've met with him on multiple occasions, seen him on multiple scenes. And so we were able to get a lot of really good information, good stories on not only what he's done, but get that additional personal feel as well, in addition to what we were able to just read on paper. We also wanted, almost as not necessarily a colleague, but to see more of what he was like as a professor, and so we could get that from the student view. But then in addition, with Dr. Swanson on here, we were also able to get that as another professor's view, and other studies as well, looking at it from a scientific view. And then lastly, of course, we wanted to see what the broad background was. What was Dr. Koppelman working with at the time? And with that, we were able to get Dr. Ryder on board, which has been, and all of these people have been absolutely fantastic in sharing just immense amounts of information, phone calls, emails, interviews, constantly working with our crazy schedules, let alone their own. So thank you all for that. It's been a pleasure.
I definitely agree with everything that Anna has said. This documentary wouldn't have been what it was without all these invaluable people sitting next to us, as well as Dr. Koppelman himself. Some faces that you didn't see on the film were people like Dr. Bowman, who is a good friend of Dr. Koppelman and was able to get us in contact with a lot of people, including Dr. Koppelman himself. Dr. Kevin Law, who was also a former student of Dr. Koppelman's, who we did interview, but due to various schedule problems, we only interviewed over email. We also talked to Dr. Seth Foreman, who also, I believe, still works at the planning department in Suffolk County, and he was invaluable with giving us those photos. So he himself created something about Dr. Koppelman a few years back, a PowerPoint as well as a video, and he had collected all those photos, and we found a few photos ourselves, but most of the photos of Dr. Koppelman were from his research, so we have to definitely accredit that to him. But no, yes, this whole documentary wouldn't have been what it was without everyone sitting here and everyone that has ever worked and talked to Dr. Koppelman.
Yes. Sarah.
My question is about environmental justice, especially here in Long Island. So, thinking about the amazing impact in terms of environmental protection as a planner that Dr. Koppelman's work has had on Long Island, I'm wondering if you can help us understand the big environmental justice issues that you were facing then and how that has changed now.
So this is for Dr. Koppelman. So the question is about environmental justice issues and how environmental justice issues have changed over the time span of your work on planning and environmental protection on Long Island.
How are you defining environmental justice?
Do you want me to answer that, Sarah? You know, I think that, you know, disparities in inequalities in impacts, environmental impacts between different socioeconomic groups, accessibility issues. You know, one of the things you've stated that you're passionate about is affordable housing, and to me, Suffolk County is paradise, but you have to pay for it and you need to be able to get here and have housing. So, you know, environmental justice is about all sorts of things related to equality and inequality, accessibility, and environmental impacts, depending on socioeconomic status. How did I do, Sarah? Yeah.
Well, to address that, I'd have to start by saying the comments that are going to follow are basically my particular bias. Normally, in my classes, I tell the students that if I think I've got an answer closer to truth, I'll label it as my ability to understand what is truthful about the issue. If it's just my bias, I'll identify that as well. And I welcome them to challenge it, because that's part of the educational process. I wasn't being cute when I asked you about environmental justice. I was trying to duck the question. We have to fully understand in planning, as well as government or public affairs of any sort, that there's an inherent conflict between the field of economics and the field of public policy related to planning, which includes planning as public policy regarding the environment. Those two issues are in conflict. Just the definition of the term economics, from economics, it's the master of the household, from the Greek. Ecology, a science, as we all know, is a science of living organisms related to their ecosystem. These two are inherently in conflict, because the economic approach is let the market determine what the direction should be. And that means greed is good, and real estate is a wonderful opportunity if you want to become a millionaire or a billionaire. But what is the expense that you have to pay for that? Just look at the city of New York with 8 million residents, and in the summertime it seems to double. What happened to the natural excuse me, of Manhattan? It's gone. But something was substituted. An Empire City, a mega economic growth. Is that the kind of life we want for all the people on Long Island? We don't need it. That means my bias has to be that the preference in every debate between so-called justice, the environment has to come out on top, or else all this is lost, including economic gain. Again, a long answer.
I'm impressed with your nimbleness in simultaneously ducking and answering. So, yes, sir.
So I've been Lee's colleague for nearly 40 years now, and I would like to make one point about Lee that I'd like to share with everybody. Lee is, in one way, the most progressive person I've ever known. Some people treat everybody the same. Lee's way of treating people is the higher up you are, the nastier he is to you. He was always so nice to his secretaries.
Is there a question? Okay, we'll take two more.
I'm also a colleague of Lee's, but I wanted to direct my question to Richard Murdacco. Richard, you're teaching in the public policy program, the same program that Lee Koppelman is still teaching in. Taught a class yesterday, in fact. It was really incredible. So, but I just wondered, we heard about your perspective from the documentary, but can you tell us more about how Dr. Koppelman has affected your teaching, and also you write a blog too, so perhaps his influence plays out in a lot of different ways.
So when I was at Stony Brook and I took multiple of Dr. Koppelman's classes, they fundamentally shaped my approach to teaching. They fundamentally shaped my curriculum. Dr. Koppelman was kind enough to kind of open up his archives and help set the foundation for the coursework I'm doing now. When I started writing on land use and development for a variety of, it started as a blog and then it kind of blossomed into several publications, and what it really went to, one thing is Dr. Koppelman's always good for a quote, so be it about the issues of the day or an arena they're building in Ronkonkoma, he's always more than open with me to share his opinions and perspective. But in terms of the coursework that we're doing in the MAP program now, Dr. Koppelman fundamentally set the stage, and I cannot really speak and give justice to the amount of influence, especially when I hear from students now oh, I'm taking Dr. Koppelman's course and it's influencing my studies in your course. So there is a very positive influence, if that did not come across in the film, but also that it's important to remember the institutional memory of the studies that Dr. Koppelman kind of initiated, these open space programs, the connections of coastal zone science and land use and development, and the trends that our island's experiencing now. It's fundamentally important to kind of carry the torch and pass it along to the next generation of learners within the graduate program for public policy. And then ideally, these students will, maybe they'll teach, maybe they'll become elected officials, maybe they'll become policymakers themselves to start to grapple with the issues we as a region collectively are facing. So I hope that answers the question.
There's one more back there.
Oh, I have a question for Dr. Koppelman. It was said that Dr. Koppelman proposed an idea for a monorail system down the central spine of the Long Island Expressway. I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Did you get that, Lee? So the question was about the idea of a monorail along the center of the LIE, and what your thoughts are about that, or were about that. Any comments about it?
Well, it doesn't have to be a monorail. That's merely one technical development in transportation. The recommendations that I was fighting for and lost was any kind of mass transit. It could be light rail, it could be the ordinary Long Island Railroad trains, but a segregated rail line consistent with the design of the Long Island Expressway, so that we don't depend totally on automotive development. One train can move 2,000 people. To move 2,000 people on the expressway when the average car has less than 2 people shows the difference in efficiency, etc. The basic problem, of course, was that mass transit does not pay at the fare box. If you get a 30% return from the fare box, who's going to pick up the other 70? And that's a problem with bus transit, that's a problem with rail. That's why Moses was absolutely opposed to any form of mass transit, because he knew it was a money loser. And that's why I lost every one of those battles. On maglev trains, that was something different. That could have been an economic gain for corporations like Grumman, because maglev is basically an airplane fuselage without wings and without those kind of engines. And the second generation of maglev was developed right here in Suffolk County at the Brookhaven National Laboratory by 2 of their brilliant physicists. And I tried to promote maglev on a test, and all it would have required was an investment of $1 million. I got the support of the governor at the time, but the Port Authority of New York, which was never happy with mass transit, even though they were eventually forced into it by New Jersey. But the point is, it went nowhere. But the Japanese picked up on Suffolk County's inventions, and I think in Europe, France was looking at it. So other countries have benefited from the genius represented right here in Suffolk County.
Yeah, so I'm going to give now the last question. I just want to firstly give a wonderful tribute to the work the team has done. This is absolutely marvelous. And also want to pay tribute to Muriel Weil sitting there under the picture. Muriel is the widow of Peter Weil that was in the movie. You saw the first senior professor hired here at Marine Sciences. And when Peter phoned me, I was a grad student in Canada, a country boy from New Zealand, living in the Canadian prairies, got this phone call to come to New York. I was scared to death. But I came down, and part of that interview, the week I was here, I went to a lecture by this young man, Lee Koppelman, in one of the buildings just a few yards from here. And Lee was talking about plans to build a bridge, two bridges across Long Island Sound. One from Oyster Bay to Rye, I think, and the other one would be from Orient Point up to London or somewhere. And this young man was all fire and fury about this plan and all the politics, and I couldn't understand what side of the issue you were on, sir, and I still don't know. But I know the response of the people of Oyster Bay. They sold the harbour bottom to the federal government, and that blocked access for the bridge, so that killed that bridge, and this one was never built. So if it wasn't for you, sir, I wouldn't be here today, I'm sure, because you were responsible for bringing Peter Wilde here. I just want to pay tribute to Muriel's their husband. But I have a question for you. Michael Bloomberg, former mayor of New York City, has his first degree in electrical engineering. Your first degree was electrical engineering. I have a degree in electrical engineering. Why did we stray so far from our education?
What was the question?
Why did you stray so far?
Why did you stray so at all three people?
Where did you go wrong? Straying from electrical engineering.
We don't have enough time tonight or for the next month to answer that question.
That's a good thing. Malcolm mentioned that he's here because of Lee, and I'm here because of Lee. And I met Lee in 1970 and took a course at Stony Brook, and that changed my life because I was inspired by the man and what he said. And I think that the rest of this history was made. So I thank you, Lee, for that. You're my mentor. You're my professional guide all through my career, and I appreciate that, and I honor you by thanking you, and I really appreciate that. One thing I would like to say, and I think this reflects a perspective that is different today than it was when Lee was involved to the extent that he was. You haven't seen Lee Koppelman as he was. You see Lee. He's very reserved. He's very an intelligent response to any question that you throw at him. But Lee had a very, very unique ability to capture an audience and do it with, again, the facts and the reports. When there was an issue involved back then at the time, Lee would have presentations to people in the news media and to elected officials. He would tell the story first, and he would take the flak if there was a problem with it. Now, you don't get that dynamic, I don't think, as clearly as it should be. Today, there's an issue, and there's a bunch of sound bites from all different interest groups. And I think that's different. I think in that way, Lee was able, in some respect, to control the conversation the way he wanted to do it. And that's part and parcel to his success. So I think it's a little different today. But I think that in retrospect, with Anna and Megan, thinking about it, I applaud you. Number one, it was, and I said this to you, this is not an easy job. Getting into this sort of presentation project. But wouldn't it be nice if students did this sort of thing to many of the other projects that Marine Sciences has underway, in terms of relating it to the problems that people can relate to? It's not totally a science question. It's a question of how the public relates to those issues. And I think you've set a pretty high bar. But it would be something to follow up. Thank you.
I have a response to that if I'm not interrupting the dean. And maybe we could close with this one. I hate being deified, and that concerns me, and that's why I initially was going to say no to these young ladies. I have to clarify one point that relates to a question about bridges. The recommendation for the bridge from Orient Point to do island hopping in terms of Big Gull, Little Gull, Fisher's Island, etc., and so forth. While it took on a legitimacy, that's not the truth of what happened, nor was it the truth of my feeling about a bridge. So you people will be the first to get as close to the truth on a subject that I can approach. When we started the Planning Commission in Suffolk in 1960, one of the members was the mayor of the village of Greenport, Ralph Quinton. He was not only the mayor, but he was also the leading realtor in the village. Now, that village was, during World War II, extremely successful. You may not know it, because I don't think there are too many of us World War II veterans around, but Greenport was a major manufacturer of the landing barges that brought the Marines in terms of the islands in the South Pacific. Those landing barges were made right in the village of Greenport, because Greenport had a natural harbor. So you were able to have the transport to major shipping in New York City for wherever the military needed it. And after the war was over, that was the end of those contracts, and Greenport went from a vibrant, successful economic area to a tobacco road type of community. So at each of the Planning Commission meetings, and the first one I attended was in March of 1960, and thereafter, and at every meeting, after I made the director's report, the chairman would then say, any other business? And Mayor Quinton would get up and say, yes, I want the staff, now that we have a staff for the first time, to study a bridge from the town of Southold to New England. And the other 9 commissioners would smile, because the last thing on their mind with all the problems that we had was building a bridge on the east end of Long Island. Well, this went on March, April, May, June, and July. And during the dark days of the end of July, I actually had a couple hours of free time, and I was at my drawing board, and somehow I thought about this bridge, which was not original with me or anyone current, because people were talking about it. All you have to do is look at a map of New England and Long Island, and a bridge seems natural. Well, I started drawing, and before I was done, the comments of the other commissioners, like Robert David Lyne Gardner, the 15th Lord of the Manor of Gardner's Island, as well as other properties all over Suffolk County, he said, I don't mind if you support a bridge as long as it doesn't go to Gardner's Island. And at that point, the commissioner for Shelter Island, who was a retired stockbroker, piped up and said, I'll support the bridge recommendation if no bridges are from either Greenport or the South Shore to connect to Shelter Island. It's an island, we want to keep it that way. Everyone would laugh, that'd be the end of it. So in the drawing I made, I had bridges going all over the place. And I had little seagulls, and I put question mark, quizzical look on their heads. And I put it up on the board, covered it with brown paper, and when the commission meeting in August was done, and the chairman said, do you have anything else to report? I said, yes. Mayor Quinton had been asking me to do a study since March. I finally had time to do it, and I walked up to the corkboard. I pulled off the brown paper, and I said, voila! And I figured we'd have a chuckle. Well, there was silence for a moment until I figured what the drawing was, because it wasn't a subdivision, it wasn't a park recommendation, it was bridges all over the goddamn place. At that point, Gardner jumped up, ran to the corkboard, pulled my drawing off the wall and said, "How precious," and he ran out with my drawing under his arm. Well, the commission had a rule. They had to be completely done by 3 p.m. because the commissioners from the East End, from the North Shore in Riverhead and South Hold, South Shore, East Hampton, and Southampton, the ferry to Shelter Island only ran to 5 p.m. So if the commission meeting ran later, it meant either the commissioner, Ralph Quinton, or the commissioner from either Southampton, Sag Harbor, or East Hampton would have to host the commissioner from Shelter Island because he couldn't get home to Shelter Island. So the 3 o'clock rule, that was it. Whether we were done or not done, 3 o'clock, that was the end of the meeting. The chairman, Seth Hubbard from Riverhead, was a big man, 6'1", 6'2", and probably 230 pounds or thereabouts. Well, at 3 o'clock, there'd be the stampede getting out the door. And the chairman was one of the first. And we had a stringer at that time for the New York Times. That's a part-timer because the Times looked down on Long Island. We weren't worthy of a regular journalist to cover the area. And the stringer was Byron Porterfield. And he wasn't a big man. He was about my size, probably around my weight, around 150 pounds. And as Seth was going out the door, Porterfield grabbed him by the elbow and said, "What business did you transact today?" And they were still chuckling as they were going out the door. Hubbard didn't stop for a minute. He was sort of dragging Byron along with him. And with his free hand, he said, "Oh, we discussed the bridge to New England." And that was it. That was Wednesday. We met the first Wednesday in the month. Sunday morning, I got a phone call, must have been before 7 a.m. My first reaction was, "Who died?" I mean, no one calls before breakfast. And it happened to be one of the New York stations. And they said, "What about a bridge?" I said, "I have no answer to that," and I hung up. Within the next half hour, I was getting one phone call after another. And some of the calls, one of them was from France. And I wondered what the hell was going on. So I said, "Where did you get this idea about a bridge?" And he said, "It's in the New York Times, so it has to be real." Well, I was still in my pajamas. I put on a bathrobe, got in my car. I was living in Smithtown. Got into Main Street, went into the candy store, picked up the Times, and started quickly going through it. Nothing in the first main section, but the second section was called Metropolitan, where they were kind enough to consider some of the nearby counties, like Nassau on Long Island, or in Connecticut, or the counterpart in New Jersey. And on page 1 of that section, there was a 2-column brief article on planner recommends bridge to New England. And it was a serious article. I realized that in 6 months, my career with government was over. Because I never kept the county executive in the dark. You don't do that to your boss. So I did what I had prepared when I first joined the county. My secretary prepared an undated letter of resignation. And that Sunday I went to my office, I took the undated letter, I signed it, I put it in my coat, and I went home. Monday morning, I decided I had to get to the office before the county executive. We shared one room, one desk, the desk that he had before he was fired by the county 10 years earlier. And I wanted to get there before he did so that I could maintain some sense of dignity. Well, the entrance was at the back of the building, We built a jealousy room to accommodate a map of Long Island, and you could see how long Long Island is, 120 miles. Well, in any event, I got up early Monday morning, and I figured I'd beat Dennis into the office. I got there, and who's standing in the doorway? The county executive. And he's got his right hand on one jam, his left hand on another jam, and Dennison was a very handsome man, 6'1". I think all the women loved him because he loved women, but in any event, he's standing there like that, and I tried to duck under him, and he just lowered his arm. I tried the other arm, he did it, so I couldn't get anywhere. I reached in my pocket, I took out the letter, and I gave it to him. He opened up the envelope, took out the letter. He said, "What the hell is this?" I said, "I quit." He said, "The hell you do? You came up with a goddamn bridge? Now give me the reasons why we need it." That's how we got into the bridge business. I found economic reasons, but candidly, I never supported a bridge from the East End, even though I've been identified with it, because of one simple reason. Look at the North Fork of Long Island. If you had a bridge there, you'd need at least a 4-lane highway. And a 4-lane highway meant no farms would be left, no environment would be left, and it was easy for me to say no to it. But we sort of got locked into it. And that's the truth. I didn't tell the young ladies because I didn't want to disappoint them.
So I'm left wondering if your wife would argue about some of these details. Anyway, before I turn it over to David, or is it Mark, I just want to make a comment. There's a lot of discussion here about points of pride in history. We have tremendous pride in our students who are going to be leaders of the future and help us, save us from ourselves. An awful lot of pride in Lee and his colleagues and their contributions to Suffolk County, but also locally here at Stony Brook and SoMAS, an awful lot of pride in our contributions to Suffolk County and environmental quality. And there's a testament to a piece of this out there on the wall in the entrance, and it's about a colleague of ours, Charlie Wooster, who was passionate back in the 60s about issues of environmental pollutants and pesticides, and in particular DDT. And that interest came at a time when people like Rachel Carson wrote her book, Silent Spring, and that interest ultimately led to, in partnership with people at Brookhaven, which you have mentioned, the creation of EDF, Environmental Defense, and in 1970, the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, and some of the impacts of all of that leadership you can see around you here on Long Island. Many of you don't know there used to be bald eagles flying around Long Island for a few decades. And so there are really tangible, really important examples of the return on the investment of this dedication and determination. Anyway, thanks to Lee, but also on your way out, please take a look at that picture on the wall that tells a little bit of a story about Charlie and our connection to DDT, and the fascinating story about leadership from the Republican Party on protecting the environment. So lots of fascinating history here. So